that, Matt?
Yeah, exactly.
Gonna get started with the video.
Great, thanks, Sherry.
CRAVE was conceived as a way to deliver our strong educational mission and our membership's desire for their continued learning. Through the CRAVE series, our chapter will deliver webinars and virtual meetings to deliver timely and relevant topics that are affecting our industry today.
It's about the effort that we expend to connect with people. But you have an opportunity to see people, you have an opportunity to chat with people. We may not have an opportunity to have appetizers and share a drink with each other, but we stay connected, and that's really the most important thing.
Being able to work together and learn together in a new format, a new environment, really helped us take those pre-existing relationships and friendships that I had to another level.
CoreNet has taken the leadership in these kinds of conversations for years and years, and so we're delighted to have this long-term relationship with CoreNet.
I found the CoreNet to be a great community of dedicated real estate professionals, and what it means to me is it gives me a wider network of people with whom to share ideas, to derive the best learnings, to test and experiment with things that I'm working on.
This program is all about personal growth and becoming the leader that you want to be.
CoreNet has always led the way when it comes to supporting the professional development of our members. Our roundtable discussions, our education workshops, and our professional development programs are just part of what makes CoreNet so valuable to our members. It was critical for us to find a way to still be able to facilitate all of this. CRAVE has provided us the platform to be just as effective and to still provide that value to our members in a virtual environment.
CoreNet not only provides a platform for different groups to come together regardless where you come from in terms of organization, but really help each member to feel like they belong in this organization.
We have a diverse membership base, and you will find that members come from all walks of life and from all over the world. However, it's still an area of focus for us to improve upon and to embrace equity, inclusion, and diversity through increasing awareness and taking action, as we know this will lead to more success for the organization and for our members.
Thanks very much, Sherry. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Bruce Pearson. I want to welcome you to our Building Operations and Technology post-COVID-19 workshop. We've got panelists that provide us a really good background on this topic. They have some excellent information, excellent data to share with us.
At 1:30, I will be available. How about
Oh, and I was going to ask everybody if they could please place themselves on mute. This is one of the rare workshops where we've got people live, that you will be able to ask questions. Preferably will be, what we'll do is we'll have the panelists speaking, and when they ask for Q&A, as opposed to having to write in or type in a question, you're welcome to do that, but you could also just get off mute and we can have a lively discussion. We'll also want to remind you about several upcoming CRAVE webinars. On June 9th, we will be having the WWIRE CoreNet Cardio Strength and Cara. Then on June 11th, we had the business case for a supplier diversity program, building inclusive practices into the procurement process. That should be an excellent program. June 17th, we have is flexibility a stretch? How companies can leverage flex space within their post-pandemic portfolio. June 21st, we have self-advocacy in the age of hybrid work. And June 24th, through the lens of innovation, Olympus Corporation of Americas. Hope you can join us for those events. Please join the conversation. Please get online and check us out with Cornet on LinkedIn and Instagram. Thanks very much. I also want to thank our corporate partners for supporting and sponsoring our Real Advantage Committee. These are important. We also have our founding partners, the Platinum and our Gold and Silver members. So thank you very, very much. As I said, we are in today's meeting format. Please keep your microphones muted while speakers are presenting. And if you'd like to ask a question, you feel free to do so through the chat box or wait until the presenter opens up for Q&A, and then we can have a conversation. Thank you very much, Sherry. So with that, I'd like to start our meeting. This is Building Operations and Technologies post-COVID-19. I'm Bruce Pearson, your moderator, and we have some excellent presenters. We have Ren Wang, VP of Product for Cohesion, Ed Dolan, EVP with Bala Consulting Engineers, and Matt Ezold, who's the Director of Digital Planning with Bala. So with that, I'll let Ed take it away.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to start off. Yeah, I'll start off, and then we'll jump over to Ed. And you know, we just want to take a moment because we've been doing various conversations with clients, industry peers, as part of the COVID task work that our group has had for the last year and a half now. And certainly all that work initially started off of what are the immediate remediations? How do we maintain safety? But that conversation has shifted heavily in the last, certainly the last 6 months, and is just accelerating and has caused us to really have to ask the question before we start any of these discussions of when we return, what are we solving for? And I think, universally now, there's the understanding that it's really the health and well-being of our users. And I think maybe that's on its face an obvious thing, but as a engineering firm and as part of a larger design community, that isn't necessarily always something that's said out loud as we start looking at projects and efforts with our clients. And has really caused this shift, at least for us, to looking at this idea that sustainability for us really isn't about creating sustainable buildings, but that we really need to be sustaining people. And towards that effort, again, maybe it's obvious, but for us, there's a shift in the way we have to think. We have a new sustainability engineer joining us soon, who just recently finished her master's thesis. And as part of that work, she looked at trying to take some of the major industry standards, LEED, WELL, FitWell, and really try to organize the standards and the components of them around an overall healthy building theme map. And if you take anything away from this, it really, for us, it's two things. One, the organizational structure isn't necessarily based around this idea of silos, architecture, engineering, manufacturer, integrator. It's based around themes of wellness. And to do that, you need teams that, if anything, almost look a little bit like a software development team. If you were to ask a software firm to create a map of their internal working structure, it would look a lot like this. And the second part is that if you take any one of these standards and expectations separately, well-being and sustainability, in our current environment, and Ed's going to explain this a little further, they actually work in opposition to each other. But the work we've been doing on sustainability for many decades now, if you just layer wellness directly on top of it with no other changes, is going to impact your ability to either maintain a sustainable building or a building that is focusing on the well-being of its users. And to that, we kind of want to now jump into really a discussion of what that's meant for us from the mechanical environmental side.
Thanks, Matt. So, just looking at the mostly the MEP related systems within the building and the effect on indoor air quality. The two main strategies that we've seen through all this, both early in the pandemic and then now as we really start to plan for people coming back, are what you can do short term to existing systems and what you can do more long term, more that require more of a capital investment. On the left side of the slide, you'll notice a lot of the short term operational procedures revolve around modifying building management system controls. And I know Ren is going to jump into this more when it comes to more enhanced control systems with respect to monitoring and more active system modifications. But a lot of the operational procedures revolve around what you can do within your existing systems capabilities to increase the amount of outside air that you can push through the building. Some of those are, expanding the economizer modes, which will require spaces to be a little less tolerant or on the occupants need to be able to have a little bit more tolerance with respect to the space conditions, whether they're a little warmer, a little cooler, but that will allow you to get more outside air in. Deactivating demand control ventilation, you typically want to lower the amount of outside air, or how we've designed systems is that you lower the amount of outside air if the people aren't there. A lot of what we're seeing now is deactivating those so you can continuously pump as much fresh air as you can into the building and have higher air change rates. So those types of things are more control based. Other things on the right side of the slide are more systems modifications where you would supplement your existing systems with additional technologies. The easy one is trying to install higher efficiency filtration. That's probably the most widely recommendation we're seeing. The systems would have to accommodate the larger pressure drop, because as you increase the density of a filter and it becomes more efficient to filter out small particles, the pressure drop increases. So it's a balance to figure out where that sweet spot is where you can increase it and where the system can still operate correctly. And then you can get into additional technologies like bipolar ionization, UV light, photocatalytic oxidation. Those are all supplemental technologies that can help clean and disinfect the air. One other thing we've seen a lot of research on is increasing the humidity levels. As I'll show later, this is a pretty large undertaking in most large high-rise office buildings. However, that really doesn't do anything to fight against, or to destroy the virus or anything like that. It's more helping people's immune systems operate more effectively against it. And then a lot of what we're seeing, especially in schools, we're seeing them bring in a lot more portable air purifiers just to, because they're very accessible. They really increase air change rates. The tough thing about using portable air purifiers in certain environments is the fact that acoustics, it really doesn't help, because now you have a lot of little fans throughout the space, and that can help, that can be problematic, especially in a teaching environment. So next slide. So the two things we looked at were the capital cost impacts, and the next slide that we'll talk about, we show more operational impacts. With the capital cost impacts, you'll see, when you're adding filtration, more high efficiency filtration, it's a little bit of an uptick because the high efficiency filters are more expensive, and you would have to change them out more frequently because they will get clogged up more easily. You get into bipolar, UV. Those are capital investments, but they're pretty straightforward. It's really the cost of the equipment for them to be implemented is pretty easy. A lot of them can just be inserted into the duct or the unit itself. Portable purifiers, if you thought about it 6 months ago, they were in high demand and very expensive, but now the availability is becoming more readily available, and it's come down. Humidification is the big one. Humidification would require a lot to add to a system with respect to, you're really touching the plumbing systems, the electrical systems, the equipment itself, the mechanical system. So a lot of trades are involved. And then increasing outside air, it is an uptick depending on if you have to make systems modifications, but that we're really looking at within the realm of what the existing unit can do itself. Next slide. Now, looking at the energy impacts and the operational impacts, this is kind of what Matt alluded to earlier. We actually took a baseline building that we had done a design for prior to the pandemic. It's about 120,000 square foot office building. And we had originally done an energy model on it. And what we did was we went back and modified that energy model with respect to implementing a bunch of these technologies and control strategies and seeing what the impact would be. As you can see, the original design was well below the baseline, and the baseline system for a building of that size is more terminal unit based. It's not really a central plant. So our design was a central plant, so it was a lot more efficient. Adding increased filtration ticked up the energy a little bit because of that higher pressure drop, but it wasn't really anything crazy. Adding technologies such as bipolar ionization, UV, photocatalytic oxidation, those are really, it's just a little bit of electrical energy to run those systems, but not really large impact. As you can see, the biggest one was increased outside air. And that is, the more outside air you put in there, the more mechanical refrigeration and heating you have to do to it. And that's really what drives up your energy cost and your energy use. And that's really what Matt was alluding to in the fact that what we're trying to do to make a building healthy is really in direct conflict with the amount of energy efficiency that we've all been pushing towards the last 20 years. So how we can try to figure out that melding of the two, where we're creating a building that is really a well-performing building from a healthy standpoint and energy standpoint, that's what I think everybody's really going to be concentrating on over the next at least couple of years. And we'll see how energy codes respond to that, because they are really conflicting demands. So I know Ren is going to get into some of the control strategies we talked about earlier.
Thanks so much, Ed. And to give everyone a little bit of a background here, I'm from Cohesion, and Cohesion is a technology platform that helps buildings become both healthier and more sustainable, to kind of Ed's point earlier, so that we can deliver a more modern, delightful experience to everyone within the building. And we can also affect positive ROI for operators, owners, and employers, because at the end of the day, I think everybody is concerned about how does this affect the people that are occupying the building? What does this mean for kind of their health and safety and wellness, as well as things like their productivity and their desire to even go back to the office. So it's a really, really fascinating topic, and it's something that is evolving. But our perspective at Cohesion is really that, if there is one change we can bank on, is that the spaces and the people who are operating the spaces are going to become more data-driven over time. And so I'll talk about kind of three ways that data kind of shift or evolution will affect the workplaces of the future. So the first is kind of picking up exactly where Ed left off with data-driven indoor air quality. The second is a focus more on the actual building occupants, because we do know that their expectations have changed, especially over the past year. And lastly, how do those things kind of come back and affect just overall kind of building operations and the things that the people who are running the buildings and the employers ultimately care about. So we can go to the next slide. So one thing to really kind of keep in mind is that, I think a lot of people, I've heard this said in the industry before, that buildings need more data. There's not enough data. Buildings are data poor. And actually, I don't necessarily agree with that 100%. I think buildings actually have a lot of data within them, but people don't necessarily know how to get the data out, and they don't necessarily know where to look or have the right tools to access that data. So I would say that buildings are actually very data rich, but very measurement poor. So one of the first things that I kind of want to point attention to is all the boxes on the left here. These are all factors that need to be considered when we talk about optimized indoor air quality. How do we optimize it? What things are we looking at to inform our operations of our HVAC systems? And those things range from things that are collected in real time from devices and sensors, things like the pollutant levels in the air, the temperature, humidity, the actual energy usage of some of these devices, all the way down to some of the things at the bottom, which are more calculated and kind of aggregated over time, like historical data and how things have operated in the past, occupancy trends and things like that. So you really need a combination of different things to consider to have an understanding of what's really going on and what's really important in a space. But the point is, the more data points that you have, the more you can create an informed control model for how you actually want to operate the systems inside the building. And in order to get some of these data points on the left, there has to be some hardware upgrades as well. Things like air quality sensors, things like occupancy sensors, things like energy monitors and smart meters and things like that are required to measure some of those data points. After we collect the data, then we can actually use that and use things like machine learning and AI to, over time, model out kind of an optimal way to run the system. When we talk about the system, we're moving to the right side of the slide here. These are all the the various devices in the HVAC system, things like air handler units and fan power boxes, and the variables that can be controlled via software are things like fan speed and damper position, so that you can increase kind of airflow to space. You can also increase the proportion of outside air versus recirculated air, depending again on all of the dynamic kind of conditions in the space. So this is a kind of a breakdown of how more data will help us create a better running system, better decisions on a space by space level, and that will really affect the smarter decisions. The smarter operation per space means that each space can be optimized to exactly what's going on within it, and we don't need to use blanket rules for entire buildings or entire floors and things like that, which ultimately results in some energy savings as well. So we can go on to the next slide. So, I kind of alluded to kind of how it works is some of these devices that have to be installed and connected. So that's what we refer to when we say the IoT platform here. But essentially, we're creating a network of devices and data sources so that we can aggregate them together, as well as there are integrations that we can make to existing software systems, things like access control systems that will allow us to see when people are actually coming into the building. We can integrate with things like weather APIs to understand what the relative conditions are outside the building, and all sorts of other systems as well. So again, the more data that we collect, the better off our control algorithms can become. And then lastly, kind of where all this kind of culminates is inside the application. And I'll talk more about that shortly here, but let's go on to the next slide. All right, so shifting gears just slightly. So we talked a lot about systems, talked a lot about kind of HVAC operations, but I want to shift gears to talking about people. Because ultimately all of this is for the benefit of people, whether they are actively championing for some of these changes, or if they can benefit from them and they don't even know what are some of the technologies that can help them. But starting off with collecting some sentiment from employees who work in office buildings. And this is an actual screenshot from one of our surveys that we surveyed about 1,000 people. And we asked them, before the pandemic, did you think about overall health and air quality? And some people did, but most people didn't do so, at least all the time. But then after the pandemic, you can kind of see a very, very stark shift. And this is hopefully not too surprising to anybody on the call, but it is kind of real world validation that the expectations of employees, of office workers, has drastically shifted over the last year and a half. And I think the real estate industry has always been on this journey towards being more data driven, but I think the last year and a half has certainly catalyzed that evolution. And you can kind of see why some of those factors are on this slide. We can go on to the next one. So kind of following up from that, right, I think the greater prominence of technology and will really start to surface. And technology and data obviously kind of go hand in hand. But again, looking at employee sentiment, 89% of them would use a application that was specifically focused on how do they connect better to their buildings, and how do they get more functionality, how do they stay more connected to their management staff, et cetera. And then we get into things like touchless controls. So things like digital key cards and digital elevator controls. So being able to control various systems directly from your phone instead of touching these public surfaces. And then 85% would want to know the actual air quality in real time as well. So these are some of the solutions that we're working on, and these are all powered by those integrations, the hardware, and that data that I was referring to before. We can go on. So the last slide here is really just kind of tying it all together. I think the key theme here is that there is both software and hardware at play, but ultimately, if we can kind of adopt more technology in buildings, things that either measure or monitor, or things that give employees a better experience and help us meet their expectations, then that helps us collect a lot more data, which then in turn can be used to run the building much more efficiently, run spaces more efficiently, create a lot of ROI, create a lot of more sustainability benefits. And some examples of those performance improvements are on the very right here, in terms of being able to detect faults, detect anomalies in spaces, be able to prevent catastrophic issues with pieces of equipment, and just minimize operational overhead as well. Be able to automate more of the service requests and hot and cold requests, and just overall management of employee communications and access to data and things like that. So yeah, it's a very, very exciting landscape right now. And I think more and more folks are really starting to see the power of kind of this connected ecosystem that is really powered by data as kind of the central life force, or kind of the blood that flows through the veins of a building. So with that, I will kick it over to Matt.
Thanks, Ren. So I think you brought up a really important point about the importance of data collection and how you use it. When we look at data, we generally think of it as needing to be both reliable and actionable. And there's a certain degree to which we can take data and make it actionable. We can install the systems, we can put in the pieces, parts, we can put the procedures in place. But there's that last mile piece, which is really will people react and change in the way that we want them to, for that data to have been useful to have gathered. And right now, pretty much every single client we're working with at some level has a little bit of decision paralysis on this. There's a combination of existing systems in their environment. There's fantastic new platforms like Cohesion that are kind of hit our landscape. There's different ways that you can buy them. And we've started, and the list of companies that's here isn't necessarily meant to say this is the be all and end all, but just to start to kind of describe some of the systems and some of the complexities around these decisions. First and foremost, it's important to understand that we typically have bought these type of technology in the past in a siloed manner. HR got a budget, security, IT, facilities. And based on that, we then determine what additional systems to layer on top of that to fill in the gaps. That's not really, from a data reliability perspective, a truly useful manner. And when we talk about actionable data, typically the data is most useful to the person that buys it, not the person that gets to connect to it. And because of that, what we're finding is that this conversation really needs to start in a stakeholder perspective, bringing all of the constituent groups together, because at the end of the day, the users in your building experience the building as a single experience, not the silos by which you buy it, maintain it, monetize it from. And that's incredibly important. We're also finding that it's absolutely necessary, to really look at this as a pilot approach, test, iterate, again, back to the software mentality. You never release things in their first version. And when you're looking at manipulating data in your building, you really need to take a software approach to it, because you need to understand how your users are going to react and then iterate the system based off that. At the same time, there's some other obstacles we really need to address. Depending on the platform that you use, depending on the way you manipulate data, it could be a landlord, it could be a tenant provided platform. In some cases, a landlord provided platform is going to have more ability to integrate with the overall building systems and really pull more physical building data. The tenant platforms have the potential to pull more user data. When we start talking about privacy, one of the interesting things is there may be an argument to make that a landlord-based platform has a better ability to pull privacy, not get into a privacy issue, because there's really no relationship between the users in a building and the landlord, whereas there is with a user and the tenant or the employer of that user. kind of in the same way that I'm willing to give Facebook all of my information so that they can provide me interesting information. But it's funny, I probably would not provide my mother with the same level of access to my life that I provide Facebook with. That said, I actually haven't used Facebook in a couple of years. I'm on my own social media blackout, but the principle still stands. Some other pieces here. That holistic user experience, we just talked about that. It's absolutely essential to make sure that we're doing it from the user perspective and building outward. We need to watch out about the sunk cost concerns. Well, I just spent X millions, X time and effort on this one platform. I have to use it till I depreciate it. And I'm going to, regardless of the user benefits, we're going to use the system and we're going to build on it. And then we're going to layer on top of that because we spent money on it. Technology really works best in an OpEx mentality. The CapEx mindset that we have about technology, build it once, use it until we've gotten every last life out of it. I understand that there's a sustainability discussion here, and the OpEx thought doesn't really work with that. But part of it has to do with how you build your systems and how you deploy them, and how you build sustainability into them. And then finally, that privacy issue. Any system that you're looking at that's currently built on the idea of recognizing individuals and tracking them through a space has a limited lifespan right now. Whether it's Europe's GDPR rules that are eventually going to make it to the US, or state and federal guidelines that are currently being developed, you can expect that at some point, systems that are actively tracking and manipulating specific user information are going to be a problem. Not to mention that users are unreliable and individuals are even more unreliable. It's better to look at how users overall impact a facility than to try to identify how that user is impacting a facility. We also want to kind of consider the hybrid impacts that we're about to experience. And this is part of a much larger discussion that we have, but really what I want to focus on here is, we've talked about this idea of aspect, really looking at access, safety, productivity, equity, culture, and training. It's the equity side I just wanted to touch on here for a second. A lot of people think that addressing hybrid working is a single problem. It's really two problems. One is flex working, the one I think most people are focusing on. Hybrid working and flex are not the same thing. Where you're working does not determine if you're a hybrid worker. Hybrid working is when you are moving constantly between a physical and a digital environment. It's when you're changing your perspective and the way that you react with the users around you. And when you're at the point where you have this uneven experience, part digital, part physical, that's when the true hybrid issues come into place. And so what we really talk about is the idea of addressing digital equity. How do we make sure that everyone we're working with, both on the physical side and the digital side, has the same ability to participate, has the same ability to provide experience, and really have an equitable experience? And the way to do that for us is first a digital mindset. And to do that, we look at this idea that if you were starting a company today from the ground up, you would not go find a space as the first task. You would find the group of people and the product. You would most likely, build it out of your garage, build it out of your home, build it out of a WeWork, whatever site, and you would scale into physical space. And so we like this idea that you create a homogeneous digital environment, one where everyone has the same abilities and capabilities, just in the same way that our cell phones, generally, all of us have the same abilities through our cell phones. And that we're now building our physical spaces to customize them to the reason that we're meeting at that particular location at that time. So homogenized digital, customized physical. And kind of last, I just want to acknowledge that there have been at least a couple small, nuggets of usefulness that have come out of COVID. One of those for us is the clear understanding of how much disruption can create this idea of triage in your environment, where when we left the office, we brought the things that were most important to us. The easiest example of this is your desk phone. If you have not picked up that phone in the last year and a half, there is no reason to suggest that you should be picking it up when you get back into the office. And if it's still there, I'd ask the question, why have you not adjusted your technology so that it's no longer required? That's a really small example of this, but what we noticed is that we can't really make fundamental and major changes in an environment until we have external forces pushing on that environment. If IT comes to you and says, hey, look, hybrid working is a problem, we're going to make these changes, you're only going to get so far with it because your users are going to see that as an internal, as an IT or facilities or an operation pushed exercise. But when you're able to go to your users and ask them, what are the things that are most impacting you, and then provide solutions from those same groups to help fix that, you're in this point where you're aligning against that external impulse versus saying internally, here's something that we're going to change for you. So for us, we really started to look at this idea that disruption, so long as it's system wide, can create this idea of value driven innovation. And it's the thing that we are most concerned about losing when we come back, when we all try to get to our new normal, that we're going to actually push against this idea of disruption and how it can help us in our environments. And so that's the end of the discussion that we had prepared. Bruce, I think you'd like to open up the conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. I want to thank you, Ed, and Ren. Great presentation, great information, and you guys raised some really great points. I mean, there's the hard physical issues that Ed deals with day to day that he's helping people work out and figure out, just air quality and things that physically we all used to be. Mindset of a sustainable building was how much energy can we save, what's the fresh air change, what's the CO2 and all that sort of stuff. Now we're going to go to a whole new world of we want as much fresh air as possible. We need to have sensors that Ren was talking about in terms of being able to monitor all the systems in the building and provide us with data. And yet, I always think about do you go with the Siemens, do you go with Johnson, do you go with all these different guys, and then each of them comes with their own price point, and preferably I'd rather go with a third-party, nondescript type sensor that will interface with all of them. So I'm not being held hostage by one or the other, and I don't know if that's possible. I mean, even now, I don't know whether the sensor technology is there. But and then Matt, you mentioned all these great interfaces that we have to deal with in terms of you deal with both the actual physical and the actual technology side of things and how you bring them together. And I love your idea about the hybrid not being whether you work from home or whether you work in the office, but it's how you digitally work together. It's within the environment, and that it's a employee experience issue that really ties things together. And so people, you're welcome to throw in a question by the chat line, but I'd also encourage you that if you have any questions or any comments, we'll try and manage this as best we can. Take yourselves off mute and ask a question, and we'll try to put together a little conversation here that our three experts can help us with. Anybody have a question or a comment? Boy, I sure hope that you can get off of mute.
Well, Bruce, we started this conversation, I think at the beginning. I'd be curious for some of the people that are participating. What are some of the challenges that they're running into and trying to address some of these issues? Where have they run into problems, or have they seen any kind of notable and interesting successes?
That's a great question.
Or is it just 24/7 anxiety inducing panic as we try to figure out what we're doing, which is
right.
also been happening.
And now it's been thrust on us.
Reality.
We were all thinking September was the date, and all of a sudden the governors opened up Massachusetts, and companies are starting to think, do we come back sooner?
I just have a comment. As an occupier, where we're leasing space in buildings, it becomes a little tricky to navigate these issues because you want to influence landlord, but you don't have as much influence or the right to kind of dictate how they modify systems or some of those components. And of course, within our own spaces, we have the ability to adjust. But what are you seeing sort of from the occupier side with some of this technology?
Sure. Ren, do you want to? I'm happy to jump in, but I didn't know if.
Yeah, I think I can maybe kick it off, but would love to kind of hear your thoughts as well, Matt. I think it's a really interesting question because I think actually the role of the occupier or the power of the occupier is actually increasing and changing. Because I think now, obviously, there is a little bit less demand for office space. So I think landlords are certainly scrambling to try to upgrade their systems so that they can maintain a more competitive offering over, some of their, the building across the street, right? So they can say to you, Sarah, like, hey, we have a better space for you because X, Y, and Z. But I think that's, a little bit of a gradual shift. It's certainly not going to change overnight. But one example here is, obviously let's go back to indoor air quality because it's one of the biggest topics. I think before 2020, most people wouldn't have really put indoor air quality as one of their top reasons for choosing a space. It might be something that they want to really consider, but they're not going to kind of shop around for, hey, which building necessarily has all the controls in place or all the monitoring in place. But now, I think that technology has become somewhat commoditized. Like you could get a bunch of indoor air quality sensors for your space once you move in and really see what's going on in the air. And then that creates a problem for landlords, which is, now they have tenants who are focused on this stuff and they have the means to go in and see what's going on in the space. So they're going to want to get ahead of that and be able to guarantee that all of their systems are operating properly, so it doesn't lead to potential potentially even like legal issues with health and safety and things like that. So that's one area where we've seen some interesting dialogue between occupiers and landlords, where our technology would actually come in and help both of them kind of get their needs met.
I think from our perspective, we've seen kind of some stages. First is just generally trying to make sure that from a collaboration standpoint, the ability to communicate with people that won't be in the office has been met. There's a lot of people that are on Zoom right now that weren't on Zoom before they left. And no matter what platform they had, there's still a lot of interoperability issues. There's new technology. There's certainly been a major simplification of technology in the last year. So first is just kind of, can we communicate outside of the building? The second thing that has come up kind of in that next order really is how are we managing desk space and scheduling people? I think aspirationally, there's a lot of our clients are re-looking at hoteling. I think the ones that are running pilots are starting to see that some of the original issues that came up with hoteling are still coming back, while now this is a user-driven and not necessarily a facilities-driven demand. There's still a lot of complexities around trying to get people to correctly register, book desks. But the one thing that does seem to be pretty universal is this idea of transforming typical conference spaces into group huddle flex spaces so that I can bring 6 or 8 people back. If they're going to come back in the office, they want to be able to sit together. And when they want to be able to meet together, they're going to want to make a lot of noise together because that's the reason they're coming in the building. And so we're starting to see requests for technologies to make it easier to create these kind of 8-10 person flexible rooms, then book them, then manage them and monitor them, understand cleaning cycles, that kind of thing. And then relative to indoor air quality, the application of the sensors that Ren's been talking about can happen outside of the building automation system. They don't necessarily need, they can be if you want to take that information and push it back into the building automation system. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of trying to get metrics and understanding or trying to show your users that you've done something to improve the space, those systems still work out, and can be done as a tenant-only platform. And so I think that's the next piece that we're seeing.
So Matt, when you do
a lot
that,
of discussion of
how difficult is that? If I wanted to, and this is, for example, like Sarah's position, where you've got a number of spaces that you actually lease for your employee base, either within the city or around the country, and you want to provide them with a cohesive standard format. So anybody in your team can open up whatever the app is, something like Cohesion, and,
sure,
and do that sort of thing. You obviously still need to, do you put these things just into the ceiling, absent of within the ductwork, so you're not touching the building systems, but you're just monitoring it outside of the systems? Or are you doing this in cooperation with your landlord?
No, I mean, you can install, you can do this purely from what is the air quality in the space and how, what is the air quality at the user? Not in the duct, not in the return, but what are my users experiencing in the space? And at that point, then you're fully hands-off from the building automation system.
And how do you space these things? Where do you, what's the size of these things? What's the cost of these things? How does that work?
Sure. I mean, we've seen, and Ren, I don't know if your thoughts on this, but from a air quality space sensing perspective, Some of the space sensing platforms we've been pricing out and looking at, initial installation could be in the $1 to $1.25 a square foot. And I'm generalizing really heavily because it's so programmatic based, number of open workspace to office to flex to conference. And then, some of the running costs, depending anywhere between 10, 20, 30 cents a square foot, depending on what you're doing a year.
What's the interface to get into the data? I mean, are you hooking them up to the?
It's all cloud driven.
It's all cloud.
I mean, this is a full IoT platform. So
okay.
Yeah.
With their wireless sensors, things of that nature, that can ride over the network. I would like to jump on what you just said, Matt, too, though. In a lot of those systems, a lot of them are telling you what the air quality is within the space, but it necessarily doesn't give you the ability to modify the building systems or have them react to that data. So it's a slippery slope, because now, what if the air quality isn't that great, but you really don't have the ability to modify the systems to react to it? What do you do then? So it is a slippery slope with getting that data and how you use it. To Sarah's question, also just looking at the physical infrastructure, a lot of older buildings, when they were designed, only have a certain amount of fresh air that you can have access to in the building. The systems themselves only have a certain amount of ability to handle a certain efficiency of filtration, which typically isn't what is being recommended now. You look at studies by Harvard School of Public Health, ASHRAE, things of that nature, and in the pandemic that we've been through, a lot of them, the recommendations coming out are saying, hey, we think you should have at least 5 air changes an hour of not only outside air but highly filtered air, combination of it. Most of the existing building systems can't accommodate that. So what we're seeing is, and a lot of landlords are honestly not in a position where they want to make that huge capital investment to try to overhaul everything. So when in those instances, a lot of what we're seeing gets into supplementing systems, putting in supplemental technologies, putting in some portable systems to try to deal with it on a case-by-case basis when maybe an incident happens, or maybe there's a certain area that might not have that great indoor air quality because of a system limitation. You could supplement it in those select areas. So we're seeing those types of strategies, which are more individualized and not complete overhauls.
I'm also very concerned about what we're going to see from just the individuals coming into the office, because in the past we used to see people, when we had nice cooling systems and we didn't change the air over, so we had nice cool air, conditioned air. We still saw a lot of people bringing in their personal fans in the summer and bringing in their heaters, their little personal heaters in the winter. But now, what are we going to see in terms of air purifiers coming onto every desk or under every desk? The power draw, and like you mentioned, Ed, I think it was the acoustical impact, which I think everybody's going to be fine with. Okay, they don't really want to listen to anybody in the open area anyway. So
it'll be the white noise generators. Well, that's what I always said. I said the air purifiers are going to be the new space heaters. That's what I've always said.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. They're going to generate a lot of heat too.
Yeah.
They will. I think. I don't know. I mean, I assume they put off a little bit of energy as well, some heat energy. But you're right. They're going to be, and frankly, our desk systems aren't made to be. I don't know what kind of load you're going to take on this, but you're certainly going to see your power drain from as an occupant perspective.
Yeah.
But you are definitely going to see it. I know that individuals are going to say, if you want me coming back in the office, and I'm happy to do so, but I'm going to make sure that the 5 square feet or 6 square feet around me is as clean and as fresh as I can make it, regardless of how much you show them that the air is in good quality. You could do your 5 changes of air a day, which would be very expensive, but at the same time, they're still going to want to have their own individual control of what they think their environment is.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I do think, as Ren and Matt really touched upon a lot, is I think the most realistic changes that can be made to existing building systems are not as much with the physical mechanical systems themselves, but with the controls, because the controls and controls that are more, as Ren talked about, predictive than reactive, to try to stay ahead of that. Like if you see over the course of a time period, a floor is not getting the amount of filter efficiency and outside air that can handle particulate loads. The building system can automatically react to do system flush outs on off hours instead of having to be scheduled. It can be more reactive of what it's seeing. Now that will require more sensors, but they're going to be a hell of a lot easier to implement than trying to swap out a mechanical unit.
Exactly, I agree. And to Ren's point as well, I mean, you could have a tenant-owned system so that you have a consistent interface for your employees to look at across the board, and you can still tie it in to a landlord system so the landlord is getting that information, whether it beams it to building engines, which then beams a work order to the mechanicals crew to, increase fresh air or to look into the system because something's going wrong here. And frankly, it gives a tenant maybe a lot more power because in the past they never tracked this stuff. And the tenants are now going to be able to say, you know what, if you look at the data over a month or a year's time, we're seeing some real issues in this building. You go back to the landlord and say, hey, you guys are just not performing. You're not keeping us as satisfied as we are. And I could see that being written into leases now where the tenants are going to start saying, we're expecting this, this, and this, and we're going to monitor.
Yeah. And one of the other interesting things, I mean, if you think of some of the new buildings that have just been recently built in Boston, what they're considered as high performance buildings, a lot of them from a high performance standpoint they're not much above what was typically done from an indoor air quality standpoint. It was really, really focused on energy efficiency. So, a lot of what you'd consider as, high performance buildings still do not come close to meeting what we're talking about now with respect to air change rates and things of that nature and particulate levels. The game has totally changed. And, thinking that a building that was completed 2-3 years ago is up to what people consider as a healthy building now, it's totally different. You have to rethink the way we design buildings.
Ed, one conversation a few of us were having the other day, that because as we're trying to kind of piece all this together is just the same way to say that wellness and sustainability kind of are currently working in opposition to each other. Wellness and comfort aren't necessarily aligned either. Mm-hmm. We talk about things like increasing humidity to make it easier to fight off for the body to fight off infection. Now you have to either adjust your air temperature to maintain the same level of comfort, or you need to acknowledge that, are we at the point where we need to start talking about the cultural impacts that designing a building in one area has some different expectations of the people coming into it versus if I was designing in Europe or the Middle East or somewhere else. Trying to get to the point where maybe we can start moving the dial on the demand for wellness over comfort. Mm-hmm. Which I know, and that one's like, I know every time I say that phrase, I get this look from everyone like, oh no. But if we really want to try to create that, that triangle between wellness, sustainability, and comfort, you can get two, but you can't have all, the money, time, right? I think that's a real conversation we need to have, because as designers, we react to the criteria that are set in front of us. And if the criteria are always going to be maintained at the current level, then we're either going to have some new amazing technology that none of us have thought of, or we're going to have to be shaving just little slight percentages over time to get there.
And it's all about expectations as well. I mean, we're going to have to really help our employee base understand, because everybody thinks they're an expert or will think they're an expert as every new article that comes out in terms of what's the right, healthy, well thing, and doesn't have anything, like you said, to personal comfort. So there's going to be a huge educational gap that needs to be filled to help our employee base understand what is healthy, what's well versus what's comfortable. I mean, that's been a standard for decades. I mean, if you ever left a thermostat in the middle of an office, you'd have one person going up and trying to change it for a half hour, and then someone going back and trying to change it to the other. Thank God we never actually hooked those thermostats up, and we just monitor what air was coming out of this actual systems.
Yeah, that and elevator door close buttons.
Exactly.
I think one theme here is just around kind of the democratization and kind of where some of the power for some of these decisions or the pressures for these kind of come from. I think it definitely starts at the very basic level with the employee and kind of the basic occupant of a building. Employees are going to have very, very high standards now for where they work and what company they work for, depending on kind of their policies for like going to the office versus hybrid and things like that. And that's going to make companies take notice and have to, put in certain policies to retain really good talent. And that's going to then put pressure on the buildings that those companies are leasing space from, which, all of this then cascades up and down the chain, requires or creates, higher requirements for the technology that's being used. And then, ultimately goes back to that balancing act that Matt was talking about, which is, okay, how do we create a better experience for everyone in the building while still maintaining positive ROI and the difference between wellness and comfort as well. So it is a very difficult thing to optimize, but that is the world that we are entering into.
I agree completely. I think I want to thank you all, Matt, Ed, Ren. You guys have done a great job today, and I think the exciting part is that you do have, first of all, you got job security. I think this is going to be a ongoing discussion for many, many years. Ren, you're on a very exciting path with what Cohesion's doing and potential of what it can bring to both the occupant and the owners of the buildings. And Ed and Matt, I think you guys are, you're right at the cusp of dealing with what owners as well as what tenants, when you're doing tenant build outs, what they're going to want and setting up some expectations for them. And I want to thank all of you who have participated and joined us in this call today. It's been a great discussion, and I want to thank you all for just joining us, and I wish you everybody a very good weekend. It sounds like it'll be very hot here in Boston, but wherever you are, enjoy yourselves, and thank you all for your time. Again, guys, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate you joining us on this journey. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.